Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this webinar with Danish Sound Cluster, where we are talking about UX and products sound design. For your best experience, please use headphones and turn off your automatic noise cancellation. Today, more than 300 people have signed up, so we are very excited about today's talk and hopefully get to interact with many of you listening. And you are very, very welcome to ask questions along the way, but we will take the questions in the end after the three speakers have done their talk. So, my name is Jeppe Lindegaard. I am the event and project manager here at Danish Sound Cluster. I have a background in live TV and as a self-employed sound designer and music composer. I am representing Danish Sound Cluster, and I would like to just show you a quick image here. Danish Sound Cluster is facilitating the sharing of knowledge, technology, and research to stimulate collaboration in the sound community and spread awareness about sound in society. We are a member organization in the sound industry. So, on the panel today, we have no other than Julian, who is a superstar in sound and a top-rated international speaker, and that his 5 TED Talks have been viewed more than 150 million times. One of them is the 6th most viewed of all time, is a clear proof of just that. Julian is a resounding voice in the world of sound today, being featured in Time Magazine, The Economist, The Times, The Diary of a CEO, and dozens of other top podcasts. Julian founded the Sound Agency in 2003, and its clients include Google, BBC, IKEA, Harrods, and GN Group. In today's webinar, Julian will be covering how sound affects humans and the importance of sound awareness in society, as well as in branding. Thank you very much for joining us today, Julian. And yes, Karsten Kjems, welcome to you. You are a former professional jazz drummer turned audio brand specialist and no-nonsense noise fighter. Karsten helps brands communicate their values and enhance product user experience with sound. Karsten is the founder of the sonic branding agency Sonic Minds, and their clients include Arla, Ørsted, Asus, Carlsberg, and DSB. In today's webinar, Karsten will be sharing his experience with UX sound and delve into the collaborative process of designing the Danish MitID app sound signature and the complete UX sound design for Jabra headsets. Thank you very much, Karsten, for joining us today.
Thank you, Jeppe.
Now, finally, we have Fredrik Hagman, an interactive sound designer at Volvo Car Corporation. Fredrik is responsible for all the designed sounds in a Volvo car user experience, like please refuel, fasten your seatbelt, your rear is too close to the car behind you sounds. Fredrik is a considerate designer who has a strong opinion about when to use sound and maybe most importantly, when not to use sound. In this webinar, Fredrik will be covering the importance of good sound design strategy and how to make good decisions in this design process. Thank you very much for joining us today, Fredrik. Now, before I hand over the word to you, Julian, I'd like to just start off with a couple of quick questions for you, more general. Since you're all working with sound, I'd love to hear what's the best thing about working with sound.
I think staying conscious of the power of sound and how it affects us. When you're thinking about it all the time, it puts you into a wonderful world. It's a new dimension to many people who haven't thought about it that much, as I'll say in a moment. So I love that consciousness of sound.
Any other comments, Karsten, Fredrik?
Best thing of working with sound, I would say freedom to shape people's opinions and preference. That's wonderful.
For me, it's about create meaningfulness. I discovered lately in my years that I'm actually noise sensitive. Why I react so suddenly, I get these suddenly noises really disturbs me, and also noises I cannot identify. And I discovered many people around. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think 15% of the population are noise sensitive. So I'm trying to make the world sounding better and more meaningful soundscapes out there, so we don't get disturbed and annoyed with unintentional sounds.
All right. So I'd like to hear, maybe starting with you, Karsten. Speaking of noise, what's your favorite sound to mute?
Favorite sound to mute? Oh, that's a good one. I think I have right now. It's the muted sound on Slack, even though I like the sound, but it comes too often, so I have muted that on Slack. Not because it's a bad sound, but it's playing too frequently. And also now notice that LinkedIn started making these notification sounds. So yeah, even though we make a living making sounds, but I'm trying to mute them if they don't make meaning. And it's a very fine balance. Also think we're going to discuss today, when do they make value and when do they disturb people? That's the hard balance here.
What about you, Fredrik?
Favorite sound to mute. I have this very annoying water kettle at home, which boils water and makes a sound when it's done. I muted it, and that was my best mute of my life, I would say.
Do you have one, Julian?
I think it probably would be the theme music to Spidey and His Friends, which I have two young children, and I hear that one over and over, and unfortunately it then becomes an earworm which goes round and round in my. It's a brilliant piece of music, don't get me wrong, brilliantly written, but my goodness, I'd like to mute it in my head.
I have one more. That's the onboarding sound of the Danish ferry called Kombardo. I mean, I get so angry when I hear this because they force me to hear it for these 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes going down from the deck into the car, and I know I get really anxious when I hear that sound.
All right, thank you very much. So do you have a sound that you're embarrassed to admit that you like? I have one. I can start. And mine is TikTok. They're the little sound in the end. I don't like TikTok, but I really love the sound. Do you have one, Karsten?
Not a sound that I'm ashamed of, because then I like it. So no, not really. I don't think I can at the moment. I cannot come up with one that I really like, but I don't like. No.
Okay. Fredrik?
I have to agree with Karsten. If I like it, I proudly like it, I would say.
That's good. Good for you.
Same for me.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, gentlemen, let's get things going. And for newcomers here, let me just summarize. We are talking about UX and product sound design today, and we have Julian Treasure on board, along with Karsten Kjems and Fredrik Hagman. And you, Julian, promised to kick off the fun here. So I will leave the floor to you, and thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Yep, I'm going to move myself down here so that I can be out of the way of some slides that I'm going to be talking over. So let me just remind you that we experience the world in 5 senses, not just with our eyes. And I'm going to be looking at the power of sound and hopefully give you a new understanding of why and how we need to be listening more carefully to what we do. The bottom line is that sound affects us all profoundly. And I want to distinguish two sort of sides of sound, because sound can affect us for good or for ill. So on the left-hand side, we have good sound. And here we're looking at the first of the 4 ways sound affects us. That's physiologically. It changes your body. Sound is constantly altering your body's rhythms and autonomous systems. Any sudden or unexplained noise, possibly like this. Sorry about that. That triggers your fight-flight response. You see, you just had a little shot of cortisol, raises your heartbeat potentially and your breathing rate as well. If your alarm clock sounds like that at home, I do recommend you change it. It's not very good for you. By contrast, a peaceful sound like this will lower your heart rate and reduce stress. Very effective if you have insomnia or anxiety, this sound of gentle surf. So even moderate noise has all sorts of damaging outcomes for health, as you can see from the slide behind me, but sound can equally enhance our well-being. So if we think about it, lowering blood pressure, boosting immunoglobulin, which protects against disease, even reducing experienced pain, sound can do all these good things. By the way, musical training has been shown, and there's just been some surveys out the last couple of days, it's been shown to enhance all sorts of mental facilities, verbal memory, spatial reasoning, speech processing, literacy, to the point where musicians actually have bigger brains than non-musicians. Well, I imagine there's quite a few very smug musicians in this audience now, feeling pretty good about themselves. Let me move on to the second way sound affects us, which is feelings. The obvious example is music, which Hermann Hesse described as time made aesthetically perceptible. That's emotion in sound. Music can be a very powerful engager of your feelings. And in order to illustrate that, I'm going to play you a short musical sound. It's intense. It's one of my favorite sounds from the world of audio branding. It's the wonderful sonic logo of THX. See if this has an effect on you. It gives me goosebumps every single time I hear it. I hope you felt something too. Music's not the only kind of sound that changes our feelings. Over hundreds of thousands of years, we've learned that when the birds are happily singing, all is usually well. So birdsong makes people feel safe. Also, nature's alarm clock, time to be awake. So it's a very good way to wake up in the morning and a great sound to work to, as it encourages alertness. So that's sound changing our feelings. The third way sound affects us is, oh, by the way, other sounds, of course, can do that. There's a baby laughing, my baby laughing, which makes me very happy. And this sound is one that many people adore. As long as you're indoors, thunder outside makes us feel kind of cozy and safe again, doesn't it? So the next way sound affects us is in cognition. It's how well we can think. You can't understand two people talking at the same time, or in this case, one person talking twice. You can't do it. We have bandwidth for around 1.6 human conversations. So people working in offices that sound like this, particularly if somebody's behind you talking, you can hear them, can have their productivity reduced by as much as 2/3. Staggering number, but that's true. All the research shows that noisy offices are devastating thinking productivity, solo working, concentration. That's why I helped to launch a company called Moodsonic, a range of nature-based, biophilic, generative soundscapes, which are designed to enhance both well-being and productivity in open plan offices. We launched that a couple of years ago, and it's having great success all over the world now, creating healthy, productive office soundscapes for companies like Microsoft, GSK, and SAP. So maybe we're on the road to better environmental sound inside of offices and design spaces. The fourth effect, and one of the most important, is that sound changes what we do, its behavior. We've got a wealth of research now showing that fast-paced sound, for example, speeds up eating in restaurants, walking in stores, which means we leave sooner and spend as much as 30% less. Loud music increases drink purchasing, while noise in offices has been shown not only to reduce productivity, but also to make people less helpful and sociable. Noise is generally associated with antisocial and even aggressive behavior. Even unnoticed sound can dramatically change what we choose to buy, which is why I'm showing a bottle of wine here. It's an amazing piece of research done a few years ago where scientists tested the power of sound over behavior in a supermarket selling French and German wine. Identical visual displays. All they did was to alternate the sound condition. Day one, a little bit of this. And day two, a little bit of that. And they just kept that going for months. On average, on the French music days, French wine outsold German wine by 5 bottles to 1, which may not be too surprising. But on the German music days, German wine outsold French wine by 2 bottles to 1. Now that is a huge shift in behavior, and significantly, most people, when asked, did not say that they'd even noticed the music. So the effect was entirely subconscious. Well, if that's how powerfully sound is affecting my behavior, your behavior, we really need to start designing with and for the ears as well as the eyes. Unfortunately, most of us have fallen into the habit of suppressing our consciousness of sound. We're surrounded by noise. Technology in itself is taking our attention away from the ears a lot of the time. So the eyes really do have it. And that's particularly true in marketing. Martin Lindstrom's book, Brand Sense, which is a few years old now, but nevertheless, the latest survey I've seen of this showed that of the Fortune 500 companies, 83% of their marketing budget was devoted to visual communication. Now, that's the kind of number which doesn't match what people say when you ask them how important is each sense to you. There's a big gap and a big opportunity, I think, for sound. Here's another piece of research. The Organizational Listening Project surveyed a range of companies from small to large and found that on average, they devoted just 20% of their time, effort, and budget to inbound communication, 80% to outbound. So when you say corporate communication, of course, what springs to mind is advertising, PR, social media, and so forth, all outbound. And incidentally, that was self-reported, so I think that's probably exaggerated. We all like to think that we listen better than we really do. The summary of the findings of that research is damning. Organizational listening is frankly abject. But does it matter? Well, yes, it does, because the organizations ranked as better listeners in that survey had more of the things on the left-hand side of this chart. On the green side, better morale, higher customer and staff loyalty, better staff retention and productivity, and a better reputation. Those ranked at the bottom of the listening table had more of the stuff on the right: criticism, crisis. Listening affects profit, and that is really important to understand. And it's really important to understand it with urgency today, I think, because we're undergoing an audio revolution right now. You probably have a smart speaker, or you're getting used to speaking to devices. This world where we've been deluged with text-based communication, endless, I mean, the thing that winds me up more than anything else is endless 6-digit codes to prove you're who you say you are, that kind of thing going on. That is all about to change. Smart speakers, which have sold millions and millions in the last couple of years, are just the beginning. We also have, of course, headphones, but in the middle of those things, as opposed to something that's a bit dumb that we're talking to now, be it Siri, Hey Google, Alexa, whatever, is going to be something that's artificially intelligent. I call it an intelligent agent. So it'll be a bit more like Jarvis in Iron Man, where we can have a conversation. It knows our voice, it knows our habits and our wishes. We speak to it conversationally, and it deals with all the rest of the stuff outside. Incidentally, that means it also becomes a gatekeeper, which is a huge challenge for the marketing profession in the future. So what does all this mean for brands and for organizations? Well, I think this summarizes the task pretty well. In a world where we're largely speaking to and listening to the internet, you need to be heard. And if you aren't heard, you may die and cease to exist altogether. It's no longer a good idea to spend over 80% of a marketing budget on just the eyes. But of course, no brand is actually silent at the moment. As I often remind marketing directors, we have a conversation and they say, oh, we might do some sound. You say, well, you're already doing sound. All brands are making sound right now. Most of it's just unplanned, and it's quite possibly working against the brand, not for it. So silence may be fatal, noise may be fatal. Shouting in an undesigned way and creating cacophony is an equal sin in an auditory world. So it's designing with our ears. That's the goal. And it's happening. This is a chart showing the rise of audio branding projects. The blue line shows the industry of finance and insurance, which has taken up audio branding faster than anybody else. But you can see across all industries, there's rapid growth in undertaking audio branding projects. But I would still say the vast majority of companies have not thought about this. But another reason for the growth is this amazing result, which came out in an Ipsos survey just a few years ago, where they were looking at the cues which make ads more successful, more memorable, or more make it the brand more memorable after they've been seen. And they looked at various things like putting a celebrity in or some sort of iconic visual style. But the thing that made the biggest difference was a sonic brand cue. Increased memorability by up to 9 times, almost 9 times, much more powerful than any visual cue at all. That was a real shock. So how do you do it? Well, at the center, you want to have a strategy, really summed up in guidelines. And again, I've had the conversation with marketing directors many times. Do you have a brand book? Yep, we have a brand book. How many pages are about sound? None. Why? Because we experience the world in 5 senses. So having a set of guidelines at the center is very important, just as you do for a visual brand. And then we at the sound agency, we distinguish 5 classes of sonic asset. So you have a sonic logo, probably, not always, but that's usually the DNA that holds everything together. And then you may have some music that you use, composed or commissioned. You may have an iconic voice, which is very associated with the brand. You may have soundscapes in physical spaces like shops or hospitality or even offices. And of course, you may have ear cons, which are going to form the rest of the conversation in this webinar. Small sounds, they're not a sonic logo as such, but they're sounds which are branded, designed and intended to achieve specific things. And then there are channels through which you can deploy all of these things, touch points where they can occur. Now, this has been going on actually for a very long time. Even in ancient Rome, there were complaints about street callers selling their wares, and that's certainly been going on with costermongers for a long time. Now, I know this is a Danish-based webinar, but I think some of you may recognize this. And that's the, of course, the Hemglass brand, and it makes many Swedish people run out of their front door because that's the ice cream van coming. And it's a very iconic sound, which is equivalent to street calling, I suppose, and selling wares. There are 3 types of sound that have been used in marketing over the ages. First of all, we have music. It started way back in 1926, pretty much as soon as we could reproduce music in this way, in the form of the Wheaties jingle. Have you tried Wheaties? They're whole wheat with all of the brand. Well, Wheaties sales soared and the jingle was born, and it's been used ever since. And I'll give you a slightly more modern version of that from America. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Give me a break. Give me a break. Take me off a piece of that Kit Kat pie. The second type of sound that's been used is sound effects, more the kind of thing we'll be talking about later on. And this goes back a long way as well. 1928, in fact, when this started. And last but not least, we have voice. And that's been iconic for several big brands. Here's 2 examples. And ho, ho, ho. Green Giant. So sound has been enormously powerful for a long time. These days, I think the sonic logo is the most recognizable form of sound. It's taken over from jingles really as the go-to sound. I don't think many of you could draw Intel's logo, but I reckon most of you, as soon as I've said that, are hearing this. And of course, if you go to fast food restaurants as a habit, you'll recognize that. And then if you're watching TV, this, the famous double knock of Netflix. And across Europe in particular, this is very recognizable, which is a clever manifestation of the visual logo. There's 5 dots, actually. They don't all work. And in 2007, I think it was, somebody at Mercedes thought that, I'm sorry, I'm getting a poll popping up on my screen. It's getting in the way of my mouse. Somebody at Mercedes thought that this was a good idea. It did not last very long. A strange one, that. Then we have earcons. So earcons are what we're going to be talking about a lot in the moment. I've picked 3 from the world of telecommunications. Probably the most successful one ever, which was the most played tune in the world for many years. Here's another iconic one from the early days of IP phoning. And this next one may have many of you reaching for your pocket. So, recognizable, iconic sounds, carefully designed to achieve their goals. Products also can be sold on sound, many of them, and this particularly is a very important aspect of this motorbike, the famous potato, the Harley Davidson. You can trademark a sound. Kellogg's trademarked a crunch. And of course, if you're in an airport and you hear this, you know that somebody just fired up a Mac. It's not their Sonic logo. It is a particular sound. Soundscapes in spaces can be very important too. In Glasgow Airport, when we installed this calming sound, sales in the airport's duty-free shop went up by 10%. Probably people felt a little bit less stressed and moved a bit more slowly. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fastest growing form of marketing in the world, which is sound-based. And there's podcasting forecast to be a $4 billion industry in the USA next year. Phenomenally powerful. And of course, the great joy of podcasting is you can be doing something else. You can be driving, doing your ironing, having a bath while you're doing listening to the podcast. That is the power of sonic communication. It does not take our eyes and our fingers up. It allows us to be doing something else at the same time, going very deep, very fast. So my belief is that successful brands are going to be designing with their ears, and I do urge everybody to do that. Let me leave you with 4 little golden rules for commercial sound. If you're going to make it congruent with your visual brand, and that takes skill. Then make it appropriate. It needs to arrive in a context that means it's not a shock, it's not a surprise, it's got some relevance to what's going on. And if you can make every sound valuable, they need to communicate or help people in some way. Most of all, test it, because the rules, the research, it's all very complex. And so it's very important to live test things and then roll out and keep testing so that you're always delivering something that's according to those first 3 rules. Well, thank you very much indeed for paying attention to me, for your ears today. And I'm going to hand over to Karsten, I believe, who's going to take the conversation on.
Thank you very much, Julian. Impressive. I like your talk and especially all your points there. I can really, I can nod to it. So yes, I will dive into my presentation. And allow me to share my screen here. I think it's on your screen as well. Can you confirm that, Jeppe, before I go on?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Great. So, yeah, I'd like to start out with our philosophy we have here in Sonic Minds. As noise sensitive, I definitely believe that silence is king. So when we do break this silence, it has to create more meaning than the silence itself. Otherwise, we are just creating noise. And what is noise? Then we can discuss that as well. But I have a suggestion for a definition is that noise is a sound or piece of music that doesn't make sense or value to me in the moment. I might like the Bruno Mars track Saturday Night, but I probably won't appreciate it as much Sunday morning at 7 o'clock if my neighbor is playing that same tune again and again. So even though I like the music, it doesn't mean that it's becoming valuable for me. I'm going to dive into the world of UI sounds, why we see more interest in this domain within audio branding and sound, because we're getting more and more devices talking to us. My stuff is saying beep when I'm misusing it. My fidget is yelling at me if the door is open too long. All these sounds are invading our houses, so I think it's important that we take ownership to all these audio landscapes and create more consciousness about it. So before I'll do this, I'll just talk about what is a UI sound here. First of all, we can see that research shows that premium sounds, I mean, sounds that have been worked through thoroughly, are more likely to be liked by consumers. People prefer a product that has premium sounds. I also think that Fredrik is going to talk about that as well. We also see that if they have more personality, premium sounds has more personality, as well as they find more trustworthy, and they're more preferred to use. So there's definitely a reason to invest in premium UX sounds as well. When it comes to types of sounds, I like to present some different ways we work with UI sounds. Overall, there are two kinds of UI sounds, what we call abstract, meaning sounds that must be learned and practiced before we know the meaning, and then the more skeuomorphic that we know instantly because it has a resonance for the real world. Let me allow you to play an example here from an abstract sound. I can play it again. And I suggest that if you were about to vote, what does this sound tell you? Well, hopefully it should tell you about that something or somebody is running out of power and needs to get charged up. The other sound here is what is a skeuomorphic example. Probably many of you know that from your iOS system. You put a file into the trash can. So in lack of, how do we sound like when we take a digital file and put it into the trash can? We resemble it with the sound of a piece of paper getting crumpled. Then people think it's thrown away. So that's skeuomorphism. Then within the abstract sounds, we also have different sounds. We have what we call hero sounds, which refers to Julian's ear cons. Hero sounds is the sounds what we hear very often. It could be starting from an app, winning a game, or completing a task. They shouldn't be played too often because then you devalue the hero sounds. But that's it's important that you know when are your hero moments within your user journey. Then we have what we call standard notification sounds, meaning that you need to get notified. And it's important that these also make meaning and don't notify too much, but they can still be branded. So you know, I can hear with my eyes closed that was it a Slack message, was it a LinkedIn message, was it an Airbnb message, or was it a Teams message I got there? So they're very important as well. Again, if they're getting played too much, they might getting annoying people. So it's a hard fine balance when to create an attention-seeking notification sounds. Then we have the more basic system sounds or interaction sounds, meaning when you actually touch a button or a screen. In Denmark, we have a system where you check in on the metro line and the train system. And actually, if it fails, the interaction sound and the receipt sound you get a really loud sound. So people are actually getting a little bit afraid of the machine because it kind of yells at you. So it's very important that these interaction sounds are still friendly and not pushing the user away. Then lastly, we also have what we call ambient sounds. They can be used, for instance, behind a weather app. It can be used for communicating that a device is pairing with something else, or perhaps changing drive mode in a car. I saw that for another car brand. It wasn't yours, Fredrik, where they have different sound schemes. Are you driving in relax or sporty mode or whatever mode? They have different soundscapes for that. I can play an example for that, for instance, here. So without even looking at the app, I can hear it's probably going to rain today. Here's a sound for we designed for a product. We need to communicate that the device is trying to pair with something else. And this sound keeps repeating until it actually connects. And when it connects, it has a new sound. But instead of having the same sound, did it, we need to train something else to keep this, communicating that we are trying to work on pairing your device sound, so to say. So these are the different sounds we work with. Then, of course, I totally agree with you, Julian, there's also moments when not to use sounds. It is just as important to know that. So when we do our work with our clients, we also map out when should we use sounds, when should sounds be replaced with a visual text or lights or perhaps haptic feedback. It could be in a car, you're driving, you're falling asleep. Do you need a sound? Do you need to shake it in the steering wheel, or do you need a combination of more sensors to create the attention you need? So it's very important to be aware of that as well. I'm going to talk a little about how we work with strategic sound design for our clients, because as the world gets and products are getting more and more complicated, we also need to make more tools and overviews to work with sounds. So the first thing we do when we work with sounds for our clients in terms of UI sounds, we make a architecture, what we call a UI audio hierarchy. Typically, the foundations is from an audio logo or some kind of core sound design. It could also be a music track or something else, but typically it's from the audio logo that we create a sound design from. From that, we can extract elements from this sound concept into different UI sounds. And here we divide it into different categories, as told before. What is hero? What are atmospheric? What are system sounds? What are notification sounds? And what could be warning sounds? And then within these categories, we design and try to map, what signs should make meanings, what sounds should make meanings within each category. And this is where the difficulties comes, because as you can see here, here's around 20 sounds. How do you make 20 sounds that people intuitively understand? Like this sound probably means I'm driving too fast, or this sound means I need to put some more power on my headset, etc. So that's a very important work when we do all this mapping for our clients. Also, the role of the sound, we help our clients to divide it into different categories and domains. What is actually very informative and functional? A fire alarm could be very, doesn't have to like it, but I know that when I hear the sound, I should get out of the house immediately. Whereas a more pleasant background sound could be more aesthetic. And we shouldn't confuse those. So a fire alarm shouldn't sound like something's pleasant, because then you miscommunicate. So it's important that we understand these domains here as well. When we discuss sounds with our clients, we typically make a communication spectrum. And within that, we post different sounds from the different categories just mentioned into these 4 squares. And this gives us a good way of discussing, when should we use a more branded sound? When should we definitely not use a branded sound? When should it be more simple? And when should we be more complex? Within that, this is an example from one of our clients. We can put some of the sounds we designed with them so they can understand why is the power on sound up in the upper right corner, whereas the small tap sound, which is an interaction sound, is more to the down left. For instance, you don't want a long tap sound just for tapping. So the sound should also be reflecting the user journey you're going into. And talking about user journey, it's very important that the sounds make sense in the whole journey. So what we do here when we produce sounds for our clients, we also simulate different user journeys. For instance, if you put on an in-ear headset or whatever headset on, you might hear the first sound is power on to notify the user. Yes, the headset is powered on. Then you want perhaps to device connect to your computer or something else. Then you want to start a call perhaps. Then you want to mute. And how do you know you have muted? You don't take the headset off and look at the button. Yes, it's writing red. You should hear this muted, and you want to power off again. And this user journey should make some kind of, understanding in terms of sound, so you intuitively should know what you have done. Actually, the hard challenge with doing UI sounds is that the best job feedback we can get when we ask clients if you like the UI sounds, they should say, no, I didn't hear anything. That's the best appreciation we can get, because UI sounds are not supposed to be attention-seeking. They're just supposed to nudge you and give meaning in the moment and not create too much attention. I'm going to talk a little bit about mappings in terms of sound design. Mapping is also a term used within UX, so I think some of you guys might notice, but mapping and functionality is king here. So what is mapping? First of all, it's a relationship between 2 things: turn on, turn off. That's a pair of sounds that should be instantly understood. So all these different things and elements we take into account when we do the mappings. It's important that the user can understand the design. It's easy to connect it to on, off, up and down, etc. And it's also a way to keep the users familiar with different interactions. And also the way to strengthen brand loyalty, because you understand the sounds from your product or your car or your iPad or whatever you have here. So just to give you a visual example, the stuff on the right is what we call poor mapping, because I'm in doubt if the lower left wheel is from the top or the bottom side of the heater, or which one should I use here? Whereas the one on the left one intuitively shows that, okay, which knot should I turn on to get heat on different stuff here? And we use the same thing in sounds, actually. So what should go up should also go down. Something it can be open or closed, or something can be soft or sharp, depending on what we want to communicate. So here's an example of a sound going up and down. And again, direction is also very important. I'm going to talk about that a little bit, but also open versus closed. So here's just a sound effect that something is opening up and something's kind of muting you in. So when we ask people for testing, people intuitively says, I think the last sound probably sound like I have muted something. And that's, how we can use sound design and mapping in different relationships here. And the last example I've brought here is soft and sharp, for instance. So the same notes, but played in different frequencies and different textures and different temper. So there's lots of tools we can turn on here. People often ask us, what about cultural differences? Does it make a difference if they're Chinese or European or Native Americans, what have we? Well, just for turning on the power, we're now in the UK, correct me if I'm wrong, Julian, I don't know why you have turned the switch off differently. Also in Sweden, Fredrik, down is on and off, up is off. Can we agree on that? Why do you have to do things differently? Also driving the wrong side of the road, Julian, come on. So there, of course, there are cultural differences. But talking about cars lately, I noticed this from the new Volkswagen ID Buzz. They have this on the pedals. I think it's quite funny that they have used musical terms. I mean, I'm not in doubt here which one is brake and which one is power, speed or on here. But I think it's quite interesting to see how we, different icons goes from different domains. Also, the power engine power company in Denmark called Ørsted, their logo is actually the power on sound on a mobile. So we see icons moving from one domain to cars to digital spaces, etc. So I think it's pretty interesting, and also design differences are disappearing as we're getting more and more global. Then we're going to talk a little bit about intervals. I know this is a huge slide, but just show that there are actually 12 intervals within the music. Well, at least in the Western music. If you go to Middle East, we have even more nuances, but that's a longer discussion. But within the Western hemisphere, we have these intervals that we know each interval has some kind of intuitive meaning. And this is very important when producing sound design. It's like confirm, badam, a perfect fourth or fifth, as you can see here in the feeling it creates, has been defined in terms of music psychology. And we use that as well in our work. Of course, direction, does it go down? Is it wavy? Something is unstable? Is it an arch? Or is it ascending? And is it static? This is also important in terms of what is the texture of the product we're designing here. Is it leather? Or is it metal? Is it hard? Is it soft? So the sound should be an intuitive reflection of the physical design as well. So direction is important because it can communicate different things in terms of good or bad. Is it ended or descending, so on and so on, so on here. Then there are static sounds. They can be either good or bad, but it could be really good for you. You're waiting for something, a feedback later on here. So me as a drummer, of course, the drummer is the most important instrument in a band. The drummer can make thank you, Julian. A drummer can either make a band shine or make the soloist really sound really poor. So rhythmic figures, level and tempo is so important. It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing, as Count Basie said. But in terms of sound design, it's the same thing. We can play the same sound design, but just by changing the rhythm figures. Now I understand it. It's something like knocking on the door is in Denmark called this sound here, bam, badam. I think it's universal also in the US and the UK. If you need to knock formal on a door, you should go this sound, dang, da-dang. It's called Amsterdam. So just by changing the rhythmic figures, we get different interpretation of the sound. Actually, this sound design we made for the Danish app called MitID, which is a national app everybody in Denmark needs to use to log on to the doctors, to the taxes, to the bank, is actually used the last notification here, where it says badam, badam. And that is a rhythmic representation of something went good. Yes, I think I completed something and I'm doing okay here. So accentures, tempo, and rhythmic figures also means a lot here. And I'm going to present that with the MitID, which was tested also in Denmark. And thank you for mentioning that, Julian. Testing is also very important because immediately said, we have an app which is for all Danish people from 13 years old up to 99, and everybody should like it. And they should not be in doubt of if they have swiped the sound that they have done it correctly and something positive has done. So we chose this intervals of notes here to make sure that it brings a feeling of trust and stability. And we also chose a rhythmic figure for that. Here's an image of the app where you swipe this for acceptance or for approval. So the media sound was to differ from Apple Pay, Google Pay, and all the other notification sounds. It should be very unique and must not be interpreted to something else. And here's the sheet we made. And oops, I'll go one more back here. I forgot to play the sound, most importantly. Here it goes. I'm going to play one more time. And it was actually tested around 1,300 people in Denmark, and it scored highly. So the client were sure that this was the one we should go with. And when you hear this, you says, I mean, how can this take so long? It was just no ba-dum, ba-dum. Can it be so complicated? Well, there are many thoughts behind this. And I'm definitely sure that Fredrik is also going to talk about, how many insights and thoughts and, tests goes behind just small sounds you're never aware of. Because what we are working here is within the invisible domain. And and as Julian said, bringing more awareness to this, I think people understand, okay, wow, I shouldn't buy a water bottle that screams at me when it's done. I shouldn't accept a robot cleaning my floor and it starts making, unpleasant noises. We should return it. We should vote and buy as much with our ears as well as with our eyes, so we don't get this overpolluted world here. So I don't know if I'm out of time yet, but I'm going to wrap up here shortly that to design a cohesive and meaningful UI experience, it's important that the sound design represents the brand and the value and the product design overall. It's also important that we design a key signature, a soundscape that is complex and has enough sounds and material so it can be deployed into all the sounds we need to have. So, for instance, the Netflix badang isn't complex enough to create 30 or 40 UI sounds around that one. We need more texture into it. We need to know which sounds you use where, intervals, and again, mapping, on, off, up, down, power on, power off, etc. All these things need to get designed before we can make a really good UI and user journey. And again, thank you all for my presentation here. I hope it makes sense to you. And I'd like to hand it over to Fredrik from Volvo and hopefully get some more insights about how to present really good sound design for cars.
Thank you, Karsten. I will start sharing my window here in a sec.
I'll stop my sharing here.
Let's see if you get the correct... Are you seeing my screen? That's the question.
Yes, we've seen the presenter mode.
You see the presenter mode. Sorry for that.
And just want to thank you, Karsten, very much for your talk, and you, Julian, as well. Questions are coming in rapidly, so we'll take those to wrap things up in the discussion after Fredrik's talk. Thank you.
That's better, right?
That's better.
Just make sure we have some sound as well. And there we go. Okay. Thanks a lot, Karsten. I will probably pick up quite a lot of what you talked about also in my presentation here, but I will focus a bit on sound design for automotive UX. So in our domain, we're building products which are big and they are powerful and they are driven by people, and that is happening in public spaces. So there's a high need to focus on the safety aspect in our business, something our founding fathers let's see, there we go. Quoted quite early, cars are driven by people, and the guiding principle should be safety. And it is very much about safety in the automotive world. It is also very much about safety in the sound design for the automotive world. There has been a lot of research being done on safety critical sounds that has led up to legal requirements which we are to follow. I started my journey here as the first sound designer employed at Volvo Cars, and that was mainly because there was no sound to design before that. Sounds that were in the cars by then were simple sinusoidal tones generated from a buzzer behind the speedometer. My task when I started was to define a sound design strategy for my company. And on the way, we have started a team of 4, and we have basically built our sound design strategy around these 4 pillars. So as I said, there are legal requirements, there are rating documents and standards which define a lot of the functions which we have in our cars today. Besides that, if you go to the bottom, the technical prerequisites. Once again, when I started, there was a buzzer. That has changed. Today we're working with buffered wave files and all kinds of synthesis. We have moved on from a small buzzer behind the speedometer to using the full audio system with 19 speakers and the potential of playing spatial sound as well. That has opened up doors to work with the sound in a more branding fashion, so we can include components in the sound which is actually reflecting our brand. But still, the most important part when it comes to sound design for cars is the usability factor. Also, what's interesting, and to connect to what Julian said, we experience with our 5 senses. We choose to call it the multimodal context. Our users and customers are experiencing this. The 5 senses are occupied, for sure. There are a never-ending number of use cases which they might experience on their daily usage of their cars. And our role is to take the functionality we have and analyze it to find basically the best usage of sound. And once again, to repeat what both Julian and Karsten said, when to not use sound in order to build the best sound interface possible. So back to usability. One obvious thing is audibility. Can I hear the sound? And in our case, even though we are moving towards electric vehicles, it's still quite a noisy environment. We have road noise covering the low frequency area. We have wind noise covering basically the whole frequency area. We have customers which are of all ages, also older customers, which are starting to suffer from age-related hearing losses, which we have to take into account when designing our sounds, which leaves us a quite narrow space where we can actually put our kind of fundamental message carrier around 400 to 1000 hertz. The parameter that we designed, I would say the most, with the most care historically, is the urgency. And that has to do with the safety aspect. We have a lot of, let's say, collision avoidance sounds where you're supposed to react really quick and supposed to, for example, throw yourself on the brake. This sound is very much connected to what Karsten talked about. Temporal rhythm, a certain pace, well researched in order to really draw your attention and be alert. I can also say when combining this, both audibility and urgency, it can also go the other way. It could happen if you play this sound too loud. It can actually be that people freeze instead and don't do anything. So it's really important to pay attention to how loud you're playing the sound. If we move on away a little bit from this collision avoidance and this high urgency sounds, we have all these other sounds, reminders and feedback sounds. And those are supposed to have a meaning. Those are supposed to tell me something. And we have tried out a little bit with sounds like this. Typically a sound including a natural element telling what to do. This is a seatbelt reminder. You called it skeuomorphic, Karsten. We call these auditory icons, where you're basically trying to reflect reality with your sound. In this specific case, it's a little bit of a hybrid, but still. We have tested it on our users. They gave really good rating when it comes to understanding what it is, but they also gave quite poor rating with regards to acceptance. Would I like to have this in my car? And also we get quite poor rating when it comes to how this kind of reflects, how well it reflects the brand. So I'm would like to see more of these auditory icons, but still there aren't too much in our industry at least. Also, we have to take, of course, one big part of the meaning aspect is what we show in relation to the sound. We have 2 big screens in our cars. One big source of annoyance for our customers is if we play a sound without showing any form of visual representation. Let's say a telltale, let's say a notification, anything saying what is this sound. Fourth part here is discrimination. How do I tell whether it's this sound or it's that sound? Well, we try to work with, you called it mapping, Karsten. We call it semantic categories, where we try to divide the sounds into certain reactions that we would desire. And then we let's appoint them with a certain property. Could be timbre, it could be a melody, it could be a harmony or whatever. And then we try to cluster these sounds. So if you want me to look up on the road, we have a number of functions which might say the same thing. We cluster them together. Another interesting thing with discrimination, and this goes back to my early days at Volvo, where I was very ambitious and wanted to really revolutionize this area, was to make it too complex. So I did a lot of sounds which were very musical. They were really complex. And when being out and testing it, it's quite evident that it becomes a musical piece. It becomes a little composition. It loses a little bit its signal value. And that's pretty clear when you kind of lose it. So my advice working in this area is to keep it simple, because it is an information carrier that we're working with. Okay, moving on. I found this picture on our corporate website, and it serves a purpose for a dual purpose. First of all, it reflects our brand. We're very much about this Scandinavian nature. Next thing is that this actually links to our most common function in our cars, which is the little sound of a turn indicator. When I quite early on in my career at Volvo, we were out sampling the forest in different aspects, and we sampled these. You see these little twigs sticking out from the tree trunks. We snapped a couple of those and recorded it, of course, from the dead tree trunk there lying on the ground. And we brought it back with us. We thought it would come useful. We were then asked to make a turn indicator sound for our upcoming models. And at the time, Volvo was very much portrayed as the left picture there. A car in a natural environment. Could be a beach like this, it's the island of Gotland outside Sweden, or could be in the middle of a forest. So and we thought, how could we kind of bring into this branding aspect? Well, we can use those kind of snapping twigs, and we layered them up, and we created a sound with a kind of a fuller body, and it became like this. So it's a turn indicator sound made only by broken or snapped twigs from a Swedish forest outside Gothenburg. A few years later, we were approached by our sister brand, Polestar. They have a completely different brand image. They are very much into technology, progress, science. And me and my colleague discussed how should we solve this, and he came up with a quite cool idea of mimicking a Kronecker pulse. It's basically a 1 followed by a number of zeros, the ultimate pulse. That sounds terrible, but if you run it through a guitar amp emulator, you get something like this. Two very different types of return indicator, showing two very different brand images. I can say that the second one has been, it's really a love-hate relationship people have with it. This goes through the rest of the sounds as well. So a seatbelt reminder for a Volvo could sound like this. It's quite organic. It uses some kind of natural instrument, while a seatbelt reminder for Polestar would sound something like this. It doesn't contain any melodic pattern. It's quite square, and it's basically have a quite squarey, let's call it that. Then you might argue, does this really have any effect? Well, I was surprised myself when this review popped up from Fortune.
The Swedes have really paid attention to the details. The beveled knobs feel expensive. Even the turn signal sound is like high-end heels on a hardwood floor.
High-end heel on a hardwood floor. At least I was kind of pleased with that review. If we move on to another function that we've been discussing quite a lot in recent years, it's called AVAS, and it stands for Acoustic Vehicle Alerting System. It is a sound legally required for electric vehicles in low speed, between 0 and 30 kilometers an hour. And the whole intention with this sound is to make pedestrians and other road users aware of the vehicle's presence. Interesting part with this sound is that what we discussed so far is for the interior car cabin. It's for the user of the vehicle. This is a sound which is for the outside, for society to hear. So we thought quite a lot about this, and we combined it with the company core values, safety and sustainability, and some design principles, responsibility, contextual, natural, Scandinavian. And then, of course, some managerial input, maximum acceptance, minimum annoyance. And we formed a sound where we didn't want to add any component to society. We didn't want to be a Hemglass, for example. But we wanted rather to still be audible, of course. We want to meet what's required of us, but we want to do it in a natural, and we want to do it in a kind of sustainable way. So instead of looking out, we looked inwards, and what sounds is our car actually making? Because as for the interior, it's true for the exterior. Even if we go to electric cars, they are not really silenced. They still make sound, and they make road noise. So what we did is that we did a noise-based character, where we basically didn't have to add that much sound because we could make use of the vehicle's existing road noise and just emphasize that. Then for corner cases, such as reverse, for example, we used other methods. There is a well-known fact that reversing vehicle is kind of showing some repeating pattern. So we added a little bit of this kind of reversing motion pattern to it. But in the end, it came out like approximately like this. So, where are we heading then within this industry of the automotive industry? Well, we're looking into how can we use sounds in other aspects, other than being kind of having this reactive behavior of playing chimes to the interior or this short intermittent sounds. We've done a research study where we have seen that we can affect people's motion sickness by sound. So we basically played sound ahead of emotion, and we could have an effect on the perceived motion sickness. We are working with a lot with how we can adapt all the sounds in order to be really tailored to each situation. Autonomous drive is one of the big paradigm shift that probably is going to happen. And it's quite interesting, how do we shift our thinking around sound interaction when it's not about driving necessarily, when it's more about riding the car. There are other aspects of autonomous drive as well. What if we're sharing our car? Maybe we're not owning it, we're sharing it instead. How does that change the need for sonic interaction? And also, how do we take what we have on the interior and take it exterior, but still in a kind of sustainable and a responsible way? And I will stop there for now and hand it over to you, Jeppe.
Thank you very much. Fredrik, can you maybe stop sharing your screen?
Will do.
That's perfect. Thank you. Okay, so thank you very much. Let me just pick up on your talk there quickly, because I'm curious how much experimenting mean in your creative process, and how much testing, kind of, how's the relation between those two things?
That was for me, I assume.
Yes, for you.
So testing is crucial, for sure. We test a lot on users. And I think it's very easy, especially in the case of this exterior sound. I found myself having surprised that I thought we'd done a lot of user testing, and I thought I knew quite a lot. And still, every time we do a new user test, I am surprised by the input we get. So I think it's crucial to do continuous user testing and really, as Julian said, test, because you will be constantly surprised by the answers.
Thank you, Fredrik. And I have a question from the audience here by Rafi. I hope I pronounced that correct, in this same matter here. Is neuroscience, measuring how the brain responds, an effective way of testing brand sounds, in your opinion, or do you prefer audience testing?
That's an interesting question. I think it sounds a bit tedious, I would say. I think I would be very much interested in testing more of a neuroscience approach. I think there is the little that I have experienced, it's quite a tedious process to do. And so I would say I would say I've done too little of neuroscience testing in order to tell through, but we have done mainly testing on like regular user testing.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to broaden out the discussion now and involve both you, Julian, and Karsten. And I'd like to start with you, Julian, because it seems to me that much of what you talk about is spreading awareness about sound. So what do you think is the biggest reason that many brands perhaps overlook the potential of sound?
Well, if you think about it, right back to school, we teach reading and writing. We do not teach speaking hardly at all, and listening not at all. So it's interesting, isn't it? We've been using complex language for over 100,000 years, maybe more than that. Writing only came along 5,000 years ago, and yet we've become incredibly text-based in certainly the last 50 years in the way that we conceive of communication with other people. And even before that, I think society became very ocular. Ask an architect to show you their work and they'll show you a drawing or a picture or a model. Never anything about sound. So a lot of our professions are about how things look. There are lots of design awards in the world, many, many design awards. Ask yourself how many of them are for sound. When we have the Audio Branding Academy in Germany, who have a sound awards every year, but it's very rare. There are thousands of awards given for how things look, almost none for how things sound. So I think it's societal. We have become very ocular. We are much more focused on how things look, which is strange because hearing is our primary warning sense. You hear a sphere all around you. I'm not very good at seeing what's behind me. I don't know about you, but that's why hearing works faster than vision, much faster, and it goes deeper than vision as well. It has a really powerful effect, as I said earlier, in 4 ways, which is deep and quick. So ignore it at our peril, really, but we have. I think part of that is because the world is now very noisy. I think it's becoming noisier every year, and many of us live in very noisy environments. I mean, there are 8 million people in Europe who are having their sleep wrecked night after night by noise way above the World Health Organization recommended maximum level. So noise is a huge problem, and it causes, I think, many of us to suppress our consciousness of sound. I see people in the street having a conversation at a bellow next to somebody who's drilling, and I think, why don't you just move? But we don't. We just carry on shouting into somebody's ear. So there's an awful lot to this, and you could unpick a great deal of it. But I think technology, as I said very briefly in my talk, technology has not helped. It's about to change now that the audio revolution is happening. I think we are about to re-engage with our ears and start using them consciously a lot more than we have for a long time.
Well, that's good news, Julian. I have a quick question for you, Karsten, before I dive into some of the audience questions here. You obviously have a lot of thought behind user experience sound, UI sounds, and have a great analytical approach to sound. So when you go into the creative creation process, are you in your head or are you in your heart, so to speak?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, most of what we are in the end users and the clients, mindset. What is it we want to communicate here? My opinion or my taste or my musical preferences doesn't count here. The most important thing is, does it make meaning? Does it represent the brand in a way in the sound design architecture? So I would say, of course, then, as Fredrik said, do they like it? We actually did some, it's called CATA test, to check all that apply. So if you play a sound and people should check, does this sound apply to your driving too fast or should you fasten your seatbelt? And it's interesting, as Fredrik also confirms, that this hybrid of sounds is highly understandable, but perhaps not so likable. So there's, if it's too cartoonic or it's too, sounds like something from Toys R Us, it's not so feel as aesthetic. So we're trying to find this best balance of all 3 worlds, because we cannot have everything in a sound. If it's very aesthetic, it might lose some functionality. If it's too functional, very simple, everyone understands it, we might lose some aestheticness and some brand fit. So it's a mix of both. Does it feel good, but also does it sound good, and is it understandable? So I would say it's a perfect mix of these 3 here, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect
Perhaps
sense.
Fredrik can chip in as well.
Yeah.
How do you work with Fredrik?
I fully agree. I couldn't agree more. Actually, it's really about the balance. So as I said before, we really want a sound to have high usability, but it comes with a cost, and you have to balance that cost a bit.
I think that's particularly true, if I could just say, when it comes to repetition, which is something we've been very careful with in soundscapes in physical spaces. It's like hearing the same Christmas song 25 times in a day. Nobody likes it. It could be your favorite piece of music, and just like eating too many pieces of chocolate cake, the what the economists call marginal utility drops off pretty steeply. So repetition you have to be really careful with, and the meaning of the sound, I think, has to be paramount. We are very careful about using the word like in research with clients, because in audio branding, it's more about what do people do. It's not so much about what they think or feel about the sound. It's what do they do. Obviously, you want them to have a lovely experience because they'll come back more, buy more brand, or stay longer in a store, or whatever it might be if you make a much more pleasant experience. So it's there. The hedonic side of it is very much there, what the psychologists call valence. Nevertheless, asking people about it, it's like asking a client about a sonic logo that you've just made. It's not do you like it? It's does it represent the brand, and what does it mean to the people who hear it?
I
Well,
totally agree. I have
I
one comment to that. If you can do that, when we do the listening test with a professional company, they have trained listeners that are specialized in hearing, so we can ask them, suitability, and also we call brand fits. But again, if you ask people if they like the sound, they might say no, but they intuitively understood it. So I totally agree. One thing I could wonder, I would like to be the fly on the wall when, I wouldn't say the brand name, but there's a tumble dryer I have that plays a I'm finished symphony in 22 seconds when it's done. And I was wondering, what were they thinking at the branding product department? Why don't we put this small, buzzer sound, ding, 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 playing for 22 seconds when we are done tumble drying? Going back to you, Julian, the insights, do we need that? Why?
What does that sound make you do, Karsten?
It makes me so annoying because you typically turn on the tumble dryer around bedtime. So when it's done 3 hours later, it starts playing this, fanfare, So why is it playing for me 1 o'clock in the morning? I didn't ask for that. So this invasion of sounds in our private hemisphere, I think is very crucial. So the one way to create a better sounding world, also to you, Julian, is to choose the product with our money. Don't buy a car that sounds terrible. Don't buy a tumble dryer that annoys you. I mean, so the more insights we have, I returned a water boiler because when it was done boiling, it sounded like a fire alarm. I don't want a fire alarm playing every day in my kitchen because I have another fire alarm. I just want a small pling to say when it's done.
So okay. Yep. I'm sorry, Kat, we have quite a few questions that we need to jump to before we wrap things up. There's one here about visual logos are typically updated once in a while, maybe every decade. Is that the same done and needed for sound logos? And are the updates minor tweaks or typically maybe complete remarks?
I think every great brand is about consistency. And if you take Intel as the prime example of this, Walter Werzower created that many years ago, but they revise it every year. They have a battery of lawyers because that is a sound mark, the Intel Sonic logo, and it's worth hundreds of millions of dollars to them because it's a really big part of their brand, and their brand is worth billions. So they do revise it, they do update it, but it's within quite narrow parameters, and the lawyers have to sign off every year that this is still the trademark and it hasn't veered off too far from it.
Right. Thank you.
True.
There's a question here for you, Julian, quite specific. So I hope you understand. I'm not sure I understand, but regarding it's from a question from Pedro. Regarding the AI agent interface, do you believe in the new AI pin form factor just coming out now by Humane and Rabbit R1? Or is this a detour to the obvious next step, that being direct integration in the headphones, especially with open ear design transparency mode?
Yeah, I don't think what he's talking about is wearables, or he or she is talking about is wearables, small devices that you attach to your clothing, or you might carry them, which are voice interfaces, but they're also visual. You can project things on your hand. This came about with a famous TED Talk a couple of years ago. Yeah, I think they're stepping stones. I wouldn't say they're detours, but I would say I see the future as moving very quickly in this domain. I think it's no escape that a lot of money has been invested by companies like Apple in audio technology. I mean, they overpaid massively for Dr. Dre in the first place. So, you know, in Denmark, you have GN, which has been a client of my company. There are some very good hearing aid manufacturers now who've got very clever in-ear devices. I see all this merging together into small devices in your ears, which allow you to hear what's going on and speak to and listen to. And the next logical thing after that is implants in your skull using bone conduction. You know, I met the human cyborg Neil Harbison a few years ago at TED, and he hears color. He has a device embedded in his skull with a sensor in front of him, and that pitch shifts colors down into the audio spectrum and creates tones that he can hear because he's completely colorblind. Well, I think something a little bit less obtrusive than that, a small implanted element in the skull using bone conduction allows you then to speak and listen to distant devices. We will have to have some sort of social rules about this, because it'll be pretty discomforting if you're having a conversation with somebody who's also having a conversation with somebody who's not there in a completely invisible way. At the moment, at least, we have headphones to guide us that somebody's doing that. So I think that's no more than 10 years away, I would say. And I think we'll move quite quickly in that direction with smaller and smaller devices, easier and easier to use, and voice UI will become the norm. It'll become what we're all doing very quickly.
All right, thank you very much, Julian. Jumping to the next question here, this is a quick one. Will sound ever be welcomed on websites?
I can perhaps, my opinion, no. I mean, unless I push a button where I expect the sound to do something, I wouldn't be very fond of sound just popping out without me asking for it or playing a button. So I wouldn't say it.
Right. Do you agree, Fredrik?
I won't say I'm looking forward to it, at least.
I completely agree with what Karsten just said. I think it's essential that you give people the option. Otherwise, many people are looking at websites in public places or offices or whatever, and you do not want that happening. I mean, we already have the issue of video conferencing happening in social spaces or office spaces, which is very difficult if people don't use headphones. So it's going to be about as popular as telephones on airplanes on long distance flights, I think.
Right. Thank you. Okay. So you're obviously talking a lot about designing UI sounds, both you, Fredrik, and Karsten. So what if you perhaps, what if you're a startup, if you're someone who's, on a tight budget? Hadassah here is asking if there's a UI library of sounds we can use. That's one question. And my question would be, is that something that you would recommend? Or what is the main difference between taking a designer into account and using a library?
Go ahead, Fredrik.
I would say spontaneously, I would say no to recommending it, because I think it actually needs to be a curated process to design a good sound for a UI interaction. With that said, it comes very much down to the actual context of what you're going to implement. In our case, it's as I said, it's safety critical. We need to pay a lot of attention to the actual design of the sound. There are other applications where you might have to take less consideration, but then you have to take more consideration into the actual sound interaction strategy. If I need it, do I need the sound, or if I don't? Go ahead, Karsten.
Yeah, I mean, the clients we get, the reason why they come to us because they cannot find an audio library that has encompassed the sounds they need. For instance, our headset, hearing through, anti-noise cancellation, or double click, single click. So this family of sounds, I think you call it a cluster for that. It's difficult to find in an audio library. But for standard sounds like turn on, turn off, if you have a generic product that doesn't need any branding, you can use that. But as I also see that product sounds are becoming the most present sounds a brand can play. Very few people, at least here in my part of the world, watch TV ads, constantly like this. No, I'm going to watch the TV ad tonight. No, they put in their Apple headsets on their whatever brand over the ears or turn on the table speaker, and that power on sound there is going to be the first sound they hear from that product. So I think product sounds are becoming more like branded sounds, not just something we need to have over in the UI department. They're becoming more important because the user journey starts more with the product. Like a car, it's a driving iPad. You know, I don't see Volvo over commercials very much, but I sit in my Volvo every day. So that becomes, you know, perhaps I hear the sounds 365 times a year, rather than the or logo on the TV or the radio. So I wouldn't say that you should go that way if you are trying to build a brand and build brand equity with the sounds. No.
All right, thank you. So there's a quick question here. What characterizes a complex sound? Is it the amount of notes and duration, or the meaning it should bring to the UI?
I can start, since I probably introduced the word complex sound, and knowing that it's a bit vague. I think once again it comes down to the context. It comes down to what you want to portray, or what kind of message you want to convey. As I said, my experience, when it's pretty clear when you're testing and when you pass the line of making some kind of musical composition compared to making a signal sound or something that's supposed to convey a message. I wouldn't say that there is a sharp line there. I would say it's very much about testing, but as Julian said, or someone, not just testing the valence of this or the pleasantness of this, but actually testing the usability of it. And somewhere in the middle, you will find out when is it too complex.
Thank you very much, Fredrik. There's another question here. Ideally, if we collaborate in UX design with a UI sound designer, are there any tools that would help us include the sound UI on the user/service journey with sound? Most of us use Figma, but there are no sounds available in Figma. That's a very specific question. I don't know if you have the insight to answer.
Figma is a very popular tool in the UX business, and unfortunately Figma is not including sound. There is some add-ons you could use. I have not tried them myself, but there is, and I think this is it's quite evident why it's a bit hard to work with sound and collaborate around sound, because there are different platforms. I don't know if you other guys have any good examples of it, but I'm for sure is missing a good collaboration platform where you can collaborate UX designer to sound designer in a fluent and efficient way. Figma is not there yet, and I would say that we're struggling a bit there as well, finding that optimal tool.
I think that's not surprising. It's very similar to the field of architecture, where for a very long time, architects were unable to design sound because they couldn't listen to it. You could do a model of how something looks, but they had no means of doing that. We do now have apps appearing where architects can oralize spaces, and they can say, well, if I put this covering on that wall and this covering there, how will it sound now? So it's helping them enormously to design spaces that will sound as good as they look. And I'm sure that will happen with UX as well. There will be this, the bridge will be crossed, and people will start to see UX as a holistic five senses exercise instead of just visual.
I also think that, I agree, there's no perfect tool. We have developed our own tool where we can use this mapping journey. So you sit in the car, you push this button, you hear this, and you see the screen. So something between a animation and a picture and a sound. So we have built our own little simple tool, but I do think that in the future with VR glasses, you can put up a VR glass and then you can actually see the setting and experience the user journey and hear the sounds and see what you're going to relate to. That will be the future, but I haven't seen it yet, though. It's probably right on the stairs, I believe, with the VR and AI coming up.
I think it'll be made easier with the technology we've got now, because, you know, one of the big advances that we've got happening in the world of audio right now is spatial sound.
Yeah.
Sony and Dolby Atmos competing in the way that VHS and Betamax did a few years ago on videotape. Don't know about you, my money's on Dolby, but who knows?
Yeah.
But we are able now, you know, with a standard pair of headphones to have spatial sound, and that's going to make that kind of experience far easier for people to emulate with some sort of visual device and spatial audio. You can imagine yourself sitting in a car, hearing the sounds coming from the right places in the right context and so forth. So it'll get more realistic.
One more thing I forgot, I also think adaptive sound design. So it adapts to the situation. I mean, is it nighttime? Is it daytime? You know, is it me or is my wife driving or using it, the product? So using some AI to see, okay, this is Julian. He's hearing pretty good. We don't need to shout at him, or he has this hearing loss, so we should probably use this sound design for him. I think that'll be also in the future, if we're talking about the future right now, but
yeah,
where are we going?
That's really important as well, Karsten. I think you already have that with Sony and the headphones. They test out your hearing and, you know, adapt the sound to it. And we use generative sound a great deal in soundscapes in spaces, which is also adaptive. So, for example, in an office, if people come in, the soundscape changes according to occupancy or what they're doing, almost to the, you know, point where you could say, you know, somebody with a red jumper comes in, the sound does that. You know, you can be that responsive to what's going on. So I think sound, responsive sound, generative sound, and spatial sound, if you put those three things together, you've got a pretty interesting world that we're moving into now.
And complex, especially for you, Fredrik, so the car can see, is it me or is it my son driving the car? Then we should have different, you know, audio experiences.
Yeah, and I find that really fascinating. As Julian's saying, this is really interesting to dig into and combining those three. In our line of business, I mean, with the amount of sensors we have and with the knowledge we have about the surrounding, about the passenger of the cars, it's more a matter of how do you make this the optimal adaptation, so to say. What signals are to use to really create that fluent, perfect adaptation?
All right, gentlemen, I think that will be it for this time. Finishing on a bit of on a brief talk about the future. I think it's on a good note. Thank you very much for all your questions, for everybody listening. Unfortunately, there were so many we didn't go through all of them, but I'm sure that Fredrik, Julian, and Karsten would love to hear from you if you have any specific questions. So reach out to them. Their link is on our website, and I would just like to share my screen. Yep, I say thank you to the three of you once again for joining us today. This was a webinar by Danish Sound Cluster. We are a member organization in the sound industry, working domestically and internationally. Want to thank you very much for joining us. You can follow us on YouTube and LinkedIn for more of this kind of content. A lot of webinars, where one of them is this one, Sound in Restaurants, where we have a great team. We have the creative director of Efterklang in Stockholm. We have Charles Spence from Oxford University, and Lars Borg, director of music at the restaurant Alchemist. How about that for a title? That'll be coming up on 21st of February. I hope you will join us there. So now, nothing left to say than a big thank you to you panelists and to everybody listening. I hope to see you some other time. Have a great day.
Thank you, Jeppe. Thank you, Fredrik and
Thank
Julian.
you.
Pleasure talking to you guys.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.